My husband brought home his niece after his brother and his wife passed away and told me. Watch the full thrilling story. I'm Stephanie, a 29-year-old woman. I've been married to my husband George, who's also 29, for 5 years. He has an older brother, Anthony, 34, who is married to Jackie, 31, for 7 years. George and I met back in business school and were together for almost 7 years before we finally tied the knot. So all in all, we've been together for 11 years. Anthony and Jackie met through friends and dated for 2 years before getting married, so their total time together was almost 8 years. That's a long time too. All of us have always gotten along incredibly well. Anthony and Jackie were genuinely good friends of mine too. We'd go out on double dates and do all sorts of things together. I loved them both like family. That's how close we were. Anthony and Jackie even became parents a year ago, and I've babysat for them several times. I had no idea what was going on, and it was heartbreaking. Unfortunately, Anthony and Jackie passed away about a month ago in a terrible car accident. It was a tragedy that completely shook our entire family. Their funeral was the saddest I've ever felt in my entire life. My husband and I were just inconsolable. I think we cried the most out of everyone there. It's been so difficult for us as a family to deal with this and cope with the grief of losing them. The worst part of it all, and maybe the best part too, is that they left behind their 1-year-old daughter. I say it's the worst because now she has to grow up as an orphan and will never be able to know her parents. No matter how much love we shower on her, nothing will ever make up for that. But I'm also happy that she survived since she wasn't in the car with them. After her parents passed away, we didn't know what to do. My in-laws decided that they were going to take care of her for the time being, until we figured out what to do long-term. My in-laws would have gladly taken her in permanently, but unfortunately my father-in-law suffers from motor neuron disease, and my mother-in-law spends most of her time caring for him. It just wouldn't be possible for them to take on raising their granddaughter. It would be a lot of work, and they're both quite elderly. They can't be running around after a 1-year-old. Nevertheless, they still agreed to take care of her until George could figure something out. I didn't have any problem with babysitting, but I had made it very clear to George that I didn't see myself becoming a mother at any point in the future. Both of us had discussed this several times and concluded that we didn't want kids. So as much as I loved Jackie's daughter, I couldn't raise her. It was just too big of a commitment, and I wasn't interested in being a mother. It was better for me not to be a mother than to be a bad one. So George and I started looking for people who would be willing to adopt. We were lucky that their daughter was still young and hadn't known her parents for long enough. This meant the adoption procedure was going to be easier for her than it would have been if she were slightly older. She had been living with her grandparents for the last few weeks, but then 9 days ago, George brought her home after work. He informed me that he had taken over her responsibility, and now it was going to be the two of us taking care of her until we found the right people to adopt her and make her a part of their family. Now I agreed to this because I knew it was going to be a temporary arrangement. Eventually, we would be able to find a loving home for her. Besides, after what happened to Anthony and Jackie, I just didn't have the heart to say no. Both of us were still grieving them so much, and it didn't feel right to say that I wouldn't be willing to take care of their daughter. It was kind of difficult at first because both of us had to compromise on our work hours and come back home earlier than usual. The sitter we had been using wasn't willing to stay that long and was asking for an exorbitant amount of money, which didn't seem right for our budget. We had to make a lot of changes around the house in a few days, but I was ready to do it all for the sake of Anthony, Jackie, and their daughter. It was nice to have her around. It kept us distracted from the pain of losing her parents since they were so important to us. I had even started considering adopting her myself and telling George that I didn't want to give her up. I had grown quite attached to her, and my feelings on parenthood and motherhood had started changing. But unfortunately, I still had to make a tough decision and leave it all behind. And that's because of what I found in the bag that George had brought her with. The one with all her belongings and stuff. I think most of you might have been able to guess where I'm going with this by now, considering everything that's happened so far. But never in a million years would I have ever imagined something like this. I'm still having a hard time believing that it's the truth. Yes, George is the real father of Jackie's daughter. I found out about it when I found her birth certificate and the results of a paternity test at the bottom of the bag I mentioned, the one he brought her home in. He had packed all her belongings in this duffel bag, and a couple of days ago I was looking through it. I wanted to check if she had any more socks in there since the weather was getting kind of chilly, and I couldn't find any in the socks she usually wore around the house. While going through the bag, I found a file inside. When I opened it, that's what was waiting for me. I had taken a day off from work because I had a bit of a cold coming on. George was at work when I found it, and it took me a couple of minutes to realize that the documents were authentic, not fake. For a few minutes after reading through those papers, I was completely numb. I didn't even know how to react. As I mentioned above, all of us were close, and we had been together for so long that I don't think anybody would have imagined something like this could even happen. But it was right there. The proof was in front of my eyes, and I couldn't deny it even if I wanted to. I broke down in the middle of the room and started wailing like crazy. I think I might have even scared the neighbors with how hard I was crying. After being together for almost 12 years, you never expect something like this from your partner. It was so difficult for me to process, but I managed to pull myself together within half an hour and decided to stop crying. I called my lawyer immediately. I sent him photos of what I had, and for good measure, I took them with me when I was leaving the house. I still have them with me. After I had spoken to my lawyer, the reality of the situation hit me. Even though I was really sad, I was also equally angry. I don't even think anger begins to explain how I felt. I was infuriated. He was really lucky that he wasn't at home that day because I might have done something to him that couldn't be undone. I'm not even ashamed to admit it. Anyway, I was really upset, and so I decided to take photos of the documents that I had found. In my rage, I decided to send them to everybody in his family. And when I say everybody, I'm not even kidding. I mean every single person whose contact information I had on my phone. I just blindly selected all the contacts and sent it to them. The caption with the photos said that I now knew the truth about George, and I wanted to know what kind of person he was as well. After sending that text, I started packing my things as quickly as I could, so I would be able to get out of the house before George came back home. I had to do something about Jackie's daughter as well, because I wasn't going to leave a 1-year-old at home alone, no matter what was going on. I was pissed off with George, not with her. She was just a baby. She didn't even know what was going on. So I decided to take her along with me and move to my parents' house. When I reached their house that day, I had been crying in the cab the whole way there. So when I finally got to their house, I had already been crying for a while. When I saw my mother open the door, I just broke down into tears again. I didn't stop crying for about the next hour. I had turned my phone off so that nobody would be able to reach me. I simply didn't want to be contacted, especially by anybody from George's family or George himself. I was in a really bad place at the time, and I would say that I still am. There's no easy way to deal with this. Anyway, after I told my parents about what I had found and showed them the proof, they told me that I had made the right decision by choosing to file for divorce and talking to my lawyer immediately. There was no going back from this. Later that evening, George showed up at my parents' house, but it was so that he could take his niece back home with him. It's not like he didn't try to talk to me. My parents made it very clear to him that I was not interested in speaking to him. I think he was there, standing in the doorway and refusing to leave, for about half an hour, constantly arguing with my parents and demanding that they let him in so he could talk to me. He insisted that he could explain everything, but I'm not an idiot. What happened? No explanation of his was going to change the truth. I was disappointed. Part of me wanted to go down and talk to him myself, so that I would at least be able to get some clarity, some closure. But I decided against it, because I didn't trust myself or my emotions. I didn't want to act rashly. Everything was still very fresh that day, and I couldn't deal with any of this drama at that point. So I chose to stay in my room quietly and let him argue with my parents, then leave, instead of going downstairs to talk to him myself. So he left with his niece. I only turned my phone back on after that. As soon as I turned it back on, I was bombarded with messages from everybody who had received my text earlier. The one where I had sent them the pictures of the documents and talked about how I finally knew what George was and what he had been up to behind my back. Everybody was apologizing, even though it wasn't their fault. But I could sense that even though they were apologizing, it was more like, "We are sorry, but now that it's done, you have to take him back because you guys have been together for so long." And not, "We are sorry that this happened to you, and whatever you think is appropriate, you should do that." Most of the messages that I received had that vibe. People were saying things like, "This is unacceptable, it's outrageous," and whatnot. But the next message was mostly just them talking about how we had been together for 11 years and how they didn't want to tell me what to do. But they were sure that we would be able to work things out and would love for us to stay together. They did say that ultimately it was my call to make. But I knew that if they got to know that I had already spoken to my lawyer and filed for divorce, they would not be pleased with that. I haven't blocked George anywhere yet because I'm still very confused about what I should do. He's been sending me messages and trying to call me ever since I left, but I haven't been responding because I just don't know what to do now. My mother sent me a message last evening saying that there is an explanation for all of this, but she thinks it would be better for George to explain it to me. For that to happen, I have to speak to him. She kind of implied that I shouldn't just cut him off without even bothering to hear his side of the story, and that I needed to talk to him at least. So I messaged her back finally, saying that I didn't need to respond to him because I had seen with my own eyes what the documents said. I knew the truth now. I highly doubt that he would be able to say anything that could change that fact. She told me that I had seen what was true, but I still needed to talk to him to get to the bottom of this. Not doing so would just make it so much worse, because people in the family were already reeling from the loss of Anthony and Jackie, and this would just shatter George and his family. I am in a very difficult position, and I have no idea how to go about this. AITA, for not wanting to talk to my husband after I found out he was his niece's biological father. After reading through the comments on the original post, I decided to talk to my husband after all. I hadn't been responding to any of George's calls and texts, but after reading the comments, I opened his chat and finally replied that I was ready to talk to him. He hadn't said much in his text. He just kept telling me that he wanted to talk to me and explain everything. Not that there was much to explain. It's pretty much what I thought. But what he said made me realize that I was right to file for a divorce. Immediately I met him this morning, and he came over to visit me. He looked very upset and started by apologizing to me for keeping this a secret for so long. Then, he started telling me that he and Jackie had only hooked up once, and it meant nothing to either of them, and both of them regretted it. I did not buy that because it seemed unlikely that they would get together only once. It was just a gut feeling, and Jackie was no longer here, so she couldn't tell me the truth either. Anyway, he told me that coincidentally, both of us had been fighting, and so had she and Anthony. He says that he doesn't remember what we were fighting about, but it was something petty, and he had left the house in a huff and had headed over to Anthony's house to talk to him. But when he got there, he couldn't find Anthony, and Jackie explained to him that he had also left because they had been fighting. She looked very upset, and when George asked her what they had been fighting about, she broke down into tears. He started trying to comfort her. She invited him in and explained to him that they had been fighting about whether they were ready for a baby or not. Anthony wanted a child, and Jackie was just not ready. So that's what they had been fighting about, and he got really mad. So he left to cool down. George started trying to comfort her, and one thing led to another, so they ended up sleeping together that day. He told me that and did not come back home until really late that day. She wanted somebody to be there for her because she was really upset, and that's why he had stayed there instead of coming back. And he apologized to me for making such a huge mistake. He told me that both he and Jackie discussed it later, and agreed never to bring it up again because it was just a mistake, and it would never happen again since they knew that they loved us and would never do anything to hurt us, which is ironic given the circumstances. But shortly after that, she got pregnant. And even though she had decided earlier that she did not want kids as she was not yet ready, she did not want to break Anthony's heart. And so she decided to go through with the pregnancy. Both of them were stressed out until the baby was born. After that, when they found out her true parentage, they decided to keep it a secret from both of us and agreed that Jackie and Anthony would raise their daughter as their own and never bring this up again. Jackie was a lawyer, and she dealt with all the paperwork, which is how she was able to avoid Anthony finding out about any of the details on the birth certificate. Anthony trusted Jackie blindly, so he never bothered to double-check anything they had listed George as the true father of her daughter, since Jackie had the forethought to think that in case anything happened to her, she would want the baby to go to him next. I can't imagine how Anthony was never able to find out about any of this for so long. Almost a year. He must have trusted Jackie, and I guess he was too busy adoring his daughter to care about any of the documentation and paperwork. It was a clever move on Jackie and George's part. Not such a clever move to keep the paperwork in the file in the bag and not bother to properly hide it from me. After George was done telling me everything, I told them that it was too late for the truth, and in any case, I had already spoken to my lawyer and started to prepare for a divorce. This did not change my mind in the least. It was overall quite disappointing since I had expected that they would genuinely have an explanation that would change my mind, since they have been behaving like talking to George once would change everything. He and his family had been begging me to give him a chance to explain. But this was not something that made me think any differently. It just made me think that I was right to file for divorce, because you just can't recover from something like this, not after 11 years of being together. I don't think anybody in my place would have forgiven him, or even given him a chance to talk to me like I did today. Anyway, when I told him that I was not going to change my mind, he started begging me for another chance, and told me that he could not live without me. He even said that he had already lost his brother and such a close friend of his that he could not afford to lose me as well, and that he needed me to be there for him because he was going through so much. I almost laughed out loud because of the people that he had lost. I had also lost those very same people. I had been equally close to his brother and sister-in-law, and the four of us had been a group. But he and Jackie were the ones who screwed us over. I don't bear any ill will towards Jackie, but I can't forgive George. And even in such a situation, he was thinking about what he had been through and not me. He was the one who screwed up. This was his fault, and I was the one who had lost two of my close friends, and then found out that my husband had been cheating on me and even had a daughter with another woman who happened to be so close to me, all in just 1 month. It couldn't have been easy for me either, but I was still trying to deal with it with dignity. I explained all of this to him, but he just refused to understand and kept begging me to come back to him. After one point, it started getting on my nerves, so I just told him that he had to leave, and if he didn't, I would be forced to call the cops on him and have him removed from the property. So he left after that, but he told me that he would be back and he was not going to give up until I came back to him. He sounded pretty determined, but it honestly just doesn't make a difference to me anymore. He has broken me in ways I did not think were possible, but it's done now. And I feel like an idiot for even giving him a chance to explain. I don't know what I was thinking, but at least now I know the whole story, and I know that I cannot forgive him, not now and not ever. Update 2. I just spoke to my lawyer. It has been a week and a half since I left my home, and he finally told me that the papers were going to be served to my husband tomorrow. I have mixed feelings about all of this. On one hand, I'm relieved that we can finally start the divorce proceedings. It's been slightly delayed since my lawyer had to deal with some personal medical issues this past week. The work had been slow, but now we can finally start the proceedings, and I can just get it over with and try to move on with my life. On the other hand, I feel shattered because this beautiful chapter of my life, which has been beautiful so far, is coming to an end for such an ugly reason. I was already finding it difficult to cope with the loss of two of my friends, and now I have to deal with a divorce as well. So that's slightly sad, but I'm trying to find the silver lining. That's the only way I can get through all of this, and I hope that the divorce procedure isn't as emotionally draining as life recently has been. Update 3. Hi. So George was served with the divorce papers today. The first thing that he chose to do was visit me again, probably hoping that speaking to me in person would make me change my mind. He has been texting me and trying to call me ever since I told him to leave, but I went back to ignoring him. I also blocked everybody from his family because I did not have anything left to say to those people anymore. All of them have been trying to convince me to go back to George, and that tells me everything I need to know. They have only ever cared about George, not me. The love that his family had shown me was for George's wife, not me as a person. So I blocked everybody who had been telling me to go back to him, because if they wanted the best for me, they would understand that what George did was wrong, and lying to me and keeping it a secret was even worse. So they would understand why I wanted to leave, and why I was not staying in that marriage anymore. Instead, they refused to understand my point of view, and continued to hop on that the two of us were great together, and we had been together for so long. It did not make sense to leave over something like this. My mother-in-law said that since Jackie was gone, I had nothing to worry about. I can't believe a human being could say something horrible about another person, especially after being so close for so long. I don't know if Jackie was a good person or not, but what my mother-in-law said was really below the belt. Anyway, That's pretty much the last straw for me. Then, I blocked them all. But coming back to what happened today, after George found out that I was going through the divorce, he showed up at my parents' house. My dad was the one who was in the living room when he showed up. As soon as he frantically started ringing the doorbell and banging on the door demanding that we open up, my dad told him that he had to leave, or he would call the cops. But instead of just leaving, George decided that he was going to stay and create even more trouble. So he told my father to bring it on and said that he was not leaving until he had talked to me and convinced me to cancel the proceedings. I guess he forgot that he was speaking to my father and not me. My dad did not have a soft corner for him like I did, and he went through with his threat. He had told him that he would call the cops, and that's what he did. So George was forcibly removed from our property. He didn't even go respectfully. He went kicking and screaming. It was just really embarrassing for him, and I was watching it all from my room, not even bothering to go out because that would just lead to more trouble. Anyway, he was taken away, or rather dragged away, and that was that. I'm pretty relieved that my dad dealt with it and did not allow me to deal with it, because no matter what, I still have a soft corner for him. And that would have made it very difficult for me to report him. At least he got what he deserved. Update 4. I have been blocked by George. Yep, that happened. I just find it funny because I did not block him. He did. I can't imagine why he would do so when I am already ignoring him and not bothering him at all. It'll just make it difficult for us to communicate directly during the divorce. Ultimately, it's his decision. Well, his decision was influenced by his family. His mother sent me an email after that day when we called the cops on him and he was forcibly removed from our property. She mentioned in the email that she was incredibly disappointed that our family would do something like this and treat him like a criminal when he was only trying to get me back. She was acting like we were the villains for doing what any other family in our place would have done. She did not even seem to care for the fact that it was George who had been acting unhinged and had spoken in a very harsh tone to my father. It's not like he hadn't been warned. My father had told him that if he didn't leave, he would call the cops on him. He had been warned, and yet he chose to stay there. After that, we were not responsible for what happened to him. He was trying to compensate for his mistakes in the past, in her opinion, and she was just playing the victim. She said that she couldn't believe that despite having such a close relationship for so many years, my family put him through something like this, and I would sit by and allow it to happen. She expressed how disappointed she was that I hadn't even bothered to come out of the house to check on him and make sure that he was all right, even as he was being taken away. So she told me towards the end of the email that her son would not be bothering me anymore and that she was going to make sure that he moved on from me as quickly as he could. Well, good luck to her with that. God knows I want the same things as well for both of us. But anyway, the game is on now. I'm only going to focus on getting what I deserve from the divorce and nothing else. No sympathy, no mercy, and no soft corners anymore. Stay tuned for more stories from Insightful Tales. After experiencing the full journey of our story, we'd love to hear your thoughts. How did the story resonate with you? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay blessed. Thank you for watching and see you in the next story.